This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Gandolfini, Jim, Tony, and the Life of Legend. The author is Jason Bailey, and there it is. Jason is holding it up. We've got it back here too. Product placement,
I saw
Jason.
that.
More than a,
Appreciate that.
of course, more than a decade after it's hard to believe too. It's been more than a decade after his sudden
Yeah.
passing. James Gandolfini still exerts a powerful pull on television and film enthusiasts around the world. His charismatic portrayal of complex, flawed, but always human men illuminated the contradictions in all of us, as well as our potential for grace and the power of love and family. This new biography from Bailey is based on extensive research and original reporting, including interviews with friends and collaborators. Bailey follows Gandolfini's rise from bit parts to character roles, enlivened with menace and vulnerability to Tony Soprano, the breakout role that would make him a legend, of course, and onto a post-Sopranos career in which he continued to challenge himself and his audience. The result is the definitive biography on the man behind Tony Soprano and the actor beyond that one role. Jason Bailey is a film critic and historian and the author of 6 books, including Fun City Cinema, New York City and the Movies That Made It, Pulp Fiction, the complete story of Quentin Tarantino's masterpiece. A graduate of NYU's Cultural Reporting and Criticism program, his essays and reviews have appeared in the New York Times, Vanity Fair, Bloomberg, Vulture, Rolling Stone, The Playlist, Slate, Time, and more. He is a member of the New York Film Critics Circle and the Critics' Choice Association, the editor-in-chief of Cricket Marquee, and co-host of the podcast Guide for the Film Fanatic, A Very Good Year and Fun City Cinema. Happy to have Jason Bailey join me here on the Speaking of Writers podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve. I really appreciate it.
It's great to have you here. Why this book on James Gandolfini for you?
I wanted to challenge myself to write a full-on, cradle to grave biography. It was brought to me as an idea, something to do by Abrams Press and Jameson Stoltz, who runs that imprint. And I really did look at it as a challenge. It was something I hadn't done before. I had written this Richard Pryor book, but that was more of like a series of kind of essays about themes that run through his work. It wasn't a straight up biography. I'm fascinated by the form, and I read a lot of them. And I read a lot that are just fine, that are good. You know what I mean? You don't read a lot of great ones. Like, it's so hard, I think, with a public figure to come away from a biography really feeling like you know them as a person, as opposed to kind of knowing what they did. It's such a fine line. But there are some that have done it, and so I thought that that would be an interesting challenge. In terms of Gandolfini, it was really coming from a place of being a viewer who and a critic who had admired him before The Sopranos. So had really always thought of him as an actor who played that role, as opposed to just thinking of him in terms of that role, which is, I think, how a lot of people think of him. And so really having a desire to kind of resituate him and his career, and that as a single piece of it. That I think he's an actor, of tremendous skill and versatility that wasn't always recognized. And so I saw sort of writing a book about him as an opportunity to kind of reframe that.
I know the research was challenging with this book. First off, the family did not cooperate for interview
Correct.
requests. So it was the friends and former cast members. You did dozens of interviews here. Was there a common theme from all of these people you talked to
I
about
mean,
this man?
the main thing that everyone wanted to make sure was clear was that there was a vast chasm between James Gandolfini and Tony Soprano. And not just in the obvious ways of, he wasn't a murderous adulterer, that like he wasn't a gangster, but just that his entire temperament, the way he interacted with people, the way he carried himself, even the way he spoke was so very different from Tony Soprano that it really was a characterization that he built really intrinsically and stepped into and took on for those few months of the year that he would do that. And then he would go back to being Jim. And Jim was this kind, gregarious, soft spoken, Sort of a Steve Sharippa described him to me as just this sort of, he said this Birkenstock wearing, music loving hippie kind of dude, and told me stories about them like going to hang out in Little Italy, a couple of days before a new season was starting, just so he could get back into the character. And so that really was the common theme, was how different he was from the characters he played so convincingly, and what just the tremendous generosity of the man in terms of not just financial generosity, although there are many stories of that, but spiritual generosity, emotional generosity, professional generosity, the extent to which he would go to make the actors he worked with comfortable and allow them to do their best work with him.
I want to go back to what made this man. He grew up in northern New Jersey. What was life like for young Jim?
It was very much a working class family. I mean, that's a phrase that comes up a lot when you talk to people about how he came up and how he did live his life, that it was all the way that he lived as a successful actor, as a financially successful person, was all very much rooted in his working class upbringing. That his parents were both basically immigrants. His father was born in Italy. His mother was born here but moved back to Italy at age 2 and didn't come back until she was much older. So he really was like a first generation American and came up in a family where those Italian cultural roots were very strong. But where there really was a working class spirit. These were middle class people at best. His father had been a bricklayer and then was a janitor at a high school. His mother ran the lunchroom at a girls' high school. These were not wealthy people. And so they worked very hard and they expected him to do the same. And he always did. And that idea was there was a very non-egalitarian way in which he was on sets and in professional settings, even after he became a star. And I think a lot of that had to do with that working class background.
Where and when did the acting idea come into his head?
It started in high school for him, and as I understand, he had gone into audition for like a junior play, primarily because a friend told him that there were a lot of girls in the drama department,
Mm.
and that was a good way to meet them. I'm sure quite a number of actors have entered the field for the same reasons. But I spoke to his high school drama teacher, and she said it was just immediately apparent when the first time he picked up a script and went up to read for them, that he had a natural gift, that there was something really charismatic and naturalistic about him, that you just believed him whenever he was on stage. So he did that in high school and loved it. But then set it aside. His parents had made very clear to him that he was going to go to Rutgers, that, he would be the first man in their family to go to college. And a career in the arts, again, working class background, was not something that was even sort of within the realm of possibility to him. So in 4 years at Rutgers, which has a tremendous theater program, he didn't step on a stage once. He didn't audition for them. He didn't take a single drama class. And it was only when he suffered a personal tragedy, the loss of someone who was very close to him, that sort of recalibrated his priorities into kind of a carpe diem mode, where he felt like, okay, I'm going to get this college degree that to make my parents happy, but then after that, I'm going to go to New York and try to make a go of it as an actor, and that's what he did.
The success of this show, how did it change him?
I mean, it was very, very difficult for him, and I know whenever I read a celebrity interview or hear about a celebrity saying, I didn't sign up for this, I think we all sort of tend to sneer at that. It's like, oh, come on, you were becoming an actor. The dream is to become a successful actor. That includes fame and fortune. But he had never seen himself as a star. He had never anticipated any sort of situations where he was going to be a leading man. He saw himself as a character actor and assumed that that was what he was going to continue to be. So the level of fame and scrutiny that he was subjected to, especially in those first years of The Sopranos, which I call in the book kind of the Beatlemania years,
Yeah.
where everything having anything to do with that show was newsworthy. And the New York tabloids, because it was shot in the tri-state area, were all over anything remotely salacious that was going on in his life. And it was a real sort of jarring whiplash sort of experience for him, that he had to really recalibrate how he lived his life, how much of his business he wanted out there, and how much media he was going to talk to. So it was all really overwhelming for him. And unfortunately, as it does for a lot of people, he tended to, in sort of desperation and in pain that he was looking to numb, he did turn to substances. He had dabbled with drugs and alcohol as a younger man in the 80s, as many people in New York would have, and he found those, unfortunately, to be a pretty tempting method of escaping this sort of scrutiny and pressure that he was under.
And during the run of the show, he didn't want to do interviews at all because he felt it would take away from the character, right?
Well, that was the story. That was the line that he gave to HBO execs. And so as a result, yeah, he just did a couple of sort of in-depth profiles right at the beginning of the show. But he said, I don't want people to see me on the show and see the guy they saw joking around on David Letterman's couch. Which is certainly an understandable perspective. But as the show went on and he started doing more roles outside of it and still did not want to do media, it became very clear that no, he just really didn't like doing interviews. And when I talked to people close to him about that, they said, it was a situation that he was just really uncomfortable in. And you even see in some of the interviews that he gave, this was a sense of modesty. Like, he didn't feel like he was very interesting. He didn't feel that he had anything terribly noteworthy to say about the work he was doing or the world around him, as actors so often did. He, again, working class guy, saw it as a job that he wanted to do and then to go home and live his life.
And what was life like after The Sopranos for him?
It was a tricky time for him. He first of all, on a personal level, he had gone through a very public and messy divorce during the run of the show. But luckily, not long after the show ended, he met a wonderful woman named Deborah, who became his second wife and who he was with for the rest of his days. And then from a career perspective, it was tricky because he very much did not want to keep playing Tony Soprano for the rest of his career. Again, this was an actor of tremendous range and versatility. He wanted to show what else he could do in
Yeah.
those years. And took great pains to, if he did play a role that was anyway on the surface close to Tony Soprano, that he subverted that in some way. So you see characters like the Mexican, who appears to be a Tony Soprano type character and turns out to be a gay man, which he plays not with any of the sort of quote unquote flourishes that were still sort of common among those characters. Or he played a role like in Killing Them Softly, where he plays a busted out old hitman as like kind of a cross between Tony Soprano and Willie Loman. He didn't want to keep doing the same thing, but then, he also took great pains to do roles that were quite opposite, where he used his natural speaking voice, played a lot of military figures, buttoned up guys, and tried to do some comedy too, because he loved those. That was what he wanted to watch when he was at home, were dumb comedies. But nobody thought of him for those roles until he started putting himself out there for those. So it really was a period of just trying to show what he could do and what he was as an actor beyond this iconic role.
Died at 51.
Yeah.
What do you think his lasting legacy is, Jason?
I mean, the difficulty that I've had as I've been promoting or even talking about the book to younger viewers and readers is to make them understand how much of his career and of The Sopranos was revolutionary in 1999, 2000, 2001. And I say it's hard to communicate that because all of the things that were interesting and unique about it have become the tropes, the standards for television. Back then it was unusual for an award-worthy show to be on a cable network. It was unusual for the leading character of a one-hour drama to be an anti-hero, to be not traditionally sympathetic or empathetic, and in fact villainous in many ways. It was unusual for a show to go a year, year and a half, even 2 years between seasons. All of these things are the norm now. But that ultimately is his legacy, is that he was at the front of this show that genuinely changed television and that changed what a television actor was. And that will be his ultimate legacy. What is sad about losing him when we did is that he passed just at a moment when we were about to have this incredible streaming explosion online and on cable television. You know, there were so many more television shows that offered so many more opportunities for risk and experimentation and the kind of things he would have liked to have done. And I firmly believe that had we not lost him when he did, we would have likely seen at least one more role and maybe more that were every bit the equal of Tony Soprano in terms of what he showed us he could do as an actor.
What is next for you in your writing?
I am currently knee deep in research on my next book, which is about the origination and making and reception to and legacy of the original Die Hard movie in 1988.
Mm.
It's one of these books that sort of just deep dives into production, talk to everybody I can talk to, go through all the old paperwork. I've been digging through archives, which is my favorite kind of research. And so I'll be researching that and doing interviews for that through the summer, and then I'll start on the draft for that in the fall, and that'll be the next one out here in a couple of years.
All right, we'll look forward to that one. But this summer, on the beach this summer, it's Gandolfini. There it is, Jim Tony and the Life of Legend. The author is Jason Bailey. Jason, thank you so much for joining me.
Steve, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
And this is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. Thanks for watching.